Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, good morning from here, at least on the west coast of the United States.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hold on a second, and just kind of taking attendance here, see who's with us. Let's see. Okay.
I'm gonna have this is Andrew Guria. I can only be on here for about a half an hour, so I'll have to catch the second half on the video recording.
Okay, yeah, I just started that recording, so it should be available later today.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Well, let me ask the Lord to watch over us in our time together. Father, we thank you again that you've given us this opportunity to meet together today, and you know each one of our lives and what you have us doing in each part of the world. And we just pray, Lord, that we can continue to hear you clearly and do your will. Just be people who are, I guess, just filled with your Holy Spirit and allowing you to work through us. Thank you, Father, and just please watch over our technology today. Let everything work well, and we just want everything to honor you. And it's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. Well, we're going to work very hard to get everything in about an hour. I really like to honor our time as much as possible, and so let's just get right to it. Let me just ask if there's any pressing questions at the moment that you need to ask about assignments that you've been involved in this last week or this week. And, I think you've been getting involved in the discussions, and I appreciate that. But today, what we want to kind of get through, I'm going to make a few comments on the problem statement, which you'll be working on this week. In the discussion room, you're kind of thinking about a couple of questions that you'd like to maybe answer, and kind of determining what theories might be related to that question. And that gets us into the concept of a theoretical framework, which you've hopefully read about, especially in Miriam's book. She devotes several pages to that concept. And Dr. Henry is going to give us some comments on that issue. Let me just ask everybody to make sure you mute your microphone if you're not talking, because I get a lot of extra noise going on. Maybe I'll just do that. Okay, let's see. Okay, everybody's muted. Good. All right, that helps. So let's get right into it. I'm going to just put on the screen the document that I put in the files area of the week 2. You know, a problem statement is basically what you use to basically frame the dissertation. What topic you're working with, and the idea is to put that topic in the form of a specific problem. Sometimes I call it an opportunity also, depending on what the issue is in your particular area. But you're framing a particular, let's just use the word problem, that you'd like to work on within your context. Okay, and so what I'm showing in this document, and you'll see this kind of a little outline. Miriam kind of gives a little outline that's sort of similar to this. So does Cresswell, in terms of how to organize that problem statement section, which is the first 2 or 3 paragraphs are usually in a problem statement, not more than 7. But the idea is to, as you begin that section, and it'll have a heading, statement of the problem or problem statement. You want to start that section with kind of an introductory sentence, okay, that just kind of summarizes for your reader what the issue is you're working on. and that might take, 1 or 2 sentences, 3, that's fine. You don't want to get real involved in the problem statement section because it's to be a summary really for the reader, so the reader just gets an idea of what this dissertation is about, okay? But so, maybe that first paragraph, you're kind of summarizing what you're talking about, what the problem is you're dealing with, and then maybe just maybe a couple of sentences about, what the background of that problem is, anything that you can think that's interesting. The next paragraph or 2, you should try to focus on some studies that seem to address this problem. Now, we're not looking for a lot of studies. We're mainly looking for some kind of broad areas of study. If I'm dealing with unemployment in a particular area, I'm going to look for some studies that maybe have done some research on that issue in my area, okay? Just to show to the reader, yeah, there are others that are seeing this problem. And so that's what you're doing just in a few documentations. You don't need a whole lot there, 3 or 4 or something like that. But what it would do, it just kind of represents what's happening in terms of studies. You're going to deal with, the literature that is related to your problem statement in a literature review chapter. So here in the introductory chapter, again, you're only just giving the reader just kind of a little glimpse. It's just, 2, 3, 4 authors, sources that have related to the problem that you're addressing. Then finally, end that problem statement with just a paragraph that summarizes why your particular study you think is significant. The significance may be that you're addressing an issue in a particular way in your particular context in a way that has not been addressed before. Okay, you may not necessarily be finding brand new knowledge. Okay, but you may be applying knowledge in a specific, unique way in your particular area. Okay. So hopefully, that'll become more clear as we get into this issue. Let's just take a minute. Somebody be willing to kind of just summarize what the area is you're working with. We'll just use somebody as an example. So if you put your statement, your idea out there, then you can get a little practice here as we kind of work on that. So somebody just put out a topic that you're working with.
Bill, I'll volunteer.
Go ahead.
Can hear me.
I can hear you, Anthony. Go ahead.
And I'm happy to do so because I have a question that I might as well throw in here, and perhaps others have this question as well. So my topic is the area of church planting, and I've created some confusion, I think, already by perhaps raising the idea that I'm talking about planning related to church planting, and I'm actually dealing with something different. I'm dealing with the ongoing, what I would deem iterative process of relevant ministry planning for community transformation within the local church. And I think as I think more about the issue, the small church, the church that typically wouldn't have many resources to address this. And it grows out of the context of my work for the last 18 or 19 years with this healthcare consultancy, where they work with their clients through a very specific spectrum of planning services that, as I learned it, I asked myself 2 questions. One is, why wasn't I taught to think like this in seminary? And the second question was, I think this could have great application for the local church. It would take some labor pains to get it there, but so that's the context. That's where I'm headed. And so initially what I'm seeing is I'm starting to, well, let me say one other thing parenthetically. I don't come to this at this point in time with a ton of reading accomplished. So I'm beginning my search to look for what's out there. I'm not seeing a lot. I'm seeing planning discussed relative to church planting, not what I'm interested in or talking about. I see planning that's very more as a social service function. So I'm continuing to dig, but my question is, do you have a recommendation or a tip for when you start to lean into the literature and you're not really seeing anything that touches specifically on your area of interest? Does that mean your area is not well defined? Does that mean you're hitting something new, or you need to take a different tack in your approach to literature research? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah. One of the issues I think is just finding the right keywords, the right key concepts to use for a literature search. And when I first read your analysis of your two articles, you did talk about the fact that you'd been involved in church planting. So I may have not read that close enough to know that you're actually not going to deal with church planting, but you're really on the issue of planning. And what you've just said is you're looking at planning in regards to helping a church become a transformational presence in their community. Would that be a fair statement?
I'm sorry, I lost you for most of what you just said. My computer froze.
Oh, okay. Are you hearing me now?
I am, yes, thank you.
Okay. Like I was saying, I started first thinking you were maybe going to deal with church planting, but you're working with the concept of planning. And the goal of planning, as I'm understanding it, what you're saying now, is to be that a church could become a transformational presence within a community. Would that be a fair statement?
Right. I think that or perhaps more impactful in their transformational effort than they have been. So what my association with church planting is, yeah, if you're going to plant a church, then there's this process that people have developed that I think has some effectiveness depending on who's coming to the table. But it has always felt to me like when you're in the saddle, planning's not a priority, and the use of data, whether available public data or internal data, is really not utilized.
Okay. At BHU, I don't know if you've taken the course or not, but we have a course called Asset-Based Community Development.
I have.
Which basically, Kip Danley, of course, teaches that course, which is one model that allows looking at a community, trying to look at the resources, trying to determine, say, if it's a church kind of spearheading that area, what kinds of resources would that church have that could possibly be relevant, and what kinds of resources are in the community that church could help mobilize. Okay, that's a planning process. You wouldn't probably find that process if you just use the word planning, church planning, but if you looked up the word asset-based community development, you'd find that model. There's also other transformational community development models, church. You could use that kind of a phrase, and you're going to probably find quite a bit of literature. Again, it's just when it's the key is what kind of concept you're using as a key search word.
I have taken that course, and there's some wonderful tools that are brought to the table for use.
Okay.
Some things I certainly wasn't aware of, and I would submit that in the planning concept, the broader umbrella of it in the local church, I think those tools should be utilized. It still is not what I'm trying to investigate to determine if this is being done anywhere. So I recognize I need to keep exploring keywords, digging. I just thought I'd throw it out there and offer myself as a sacrificial lamb on this.
Good. No, I appreciate that, Anthony, because we're dealing with the issue right now as a person comes up with a topic, then the issue is finding the right kinds of keywords, concepts that begin to relate to that topic. And of course, that gets us into the whole issue of what a theoretical framework is. we're looking at models, theories, principles, asset-based community development. That's a model. It's a set of concepts that are applied to a community. So yeah, it's trying to find some of those key concepts. Sometimes people use the word theory, okay? Key theories, concepts, models, whatever you want to use, that are going to apply to your particular situation. So yeah, thanks for putting that out there and just letting us wrestle on that a little bit, okay?
So Bill, one other question. So would that mean something like appreciative inquiry would be a model as well?
That is a model, yeah. I mean, the whole concept, the 4D model of appreciative, inquiry, definition, dream, I get the name, but yeah, that is that's a model for getting at two different ways. It's a model to help look at a situation, a community, an organization on what could be, as opposed to what hasn't been, okay? And it's it's a more positive model. But yeah,
okay.
that would be a piece of a theoretical framework for a particular project. If you were going to utilize, appreciative inquiry as a model, then you would want to do a lot of research on that model to start with, and you would include that in your literature review.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to allow time for questions, so I'm kind of giving you a little overview of the problem statement. The assignment this week is the problem statement, and I also said the context. I'm thinking you don't really need to get into the context as much unless you want to, because I'm going to spill this over into next week, this particular assignment, because it takes a little bit just to kind of get the problem statement in the context of the problem all laid out. But if you can at least get that problem statement, a few paragraphs this week, and then we can give you feedback on that. Then just keep working on that problem statement, even into the context, possibly in next week, and a few other things. What I think I want to do now is go ahead and let Dr. Henry do some sharing on the theoretical framework, since we've just started to touch on that issue a little bit. And then we can have a little more time for discussion of both problem statement and the whole theoretical framework. So Dr. Henry, why don't you go ahead and take over the session for a bit, and we will work through that.
Okay.
Let me stop sharing here. Okay.
Okay. Dr. Payne, could you? Okay, you're out. I'm going to share my screen as I share with you some ideas. Share. Okay. I'm just sharing some basic notes on the conceptual framework. At the heart of any research that you're doing is the conceptual framework around which you will be doing your study. So it is important that you have clarity on the concepts underlying your study. Now, with respect to both quantitative and qualitative research, but especially so in quantitative research, the conceptual framework is usually defined by the key variables or the constructs to be studied. And I'm going to use one of your discussion pieces as an example to drill in more on the issue of the variables. So your conceptual framework demands that you show the relationship between key variables. One of the realities and the tensions in research is that on the one hand, we work with you to narrow down what you're doing to something manageable. But on the other hand, realistically, whatever study you do, you're going to see that there are a number of variables, and they're usually interrelated, that you need to understand, and that will help you to understand that those questions that you have about the study. So there's that tension in terms of the need to narrow down so that your study is manageable, and then at the same time to be realistic when you do your study, to realize that one variable alone is not a sufficient prediction or explanation of any phenomenon. Concepts explain or predict an event. And that is why the conceptual framework is so important. Aled was talking just now about church planting and planning. And at the beginning, I was not clear, but at the end, I take the statement that you gave, Andrew. It was, you said, planning in regards to a church becoming a transformational force in its community. Am I right?
Yes, sorry, it took me a minute to get the mute button off.
Okay, that was what I took away from it. Now, what I would do is I look at that statement, and right away I say to myself, what are the key words here? And keywords / concepts. I saw planning, I saw transformation, and I saw community. And those are 3 concepts. Now, it seems to me that you want to look at the relationships between those 3 concepts. And so I ask, the question I would ask of you is, what is the question behind this statement? What is the relationship you want to study about these 3 concepts: planning, transformation, and community? And that's a question I'm asking. Good. Okay.
My question would be, I would phrase it maybe 2 ways. One would be, what kind of data-driven planning can assist the church in its mission to transform communities? A second way to ask it.
Sorry, can you stop there with that question? I like that question. You said, what kind of data-driven planning, right?
Right.
Okay, you've added something to planning there.
Right.
You have defined planning, you have defined data as foundational to planning.
Right.
Now, I'm going to make a comment on that in the context of churches. You said earlier that one of the weaknesses you've noticed about churches is that we don't use data. Now, when you put in that word data-driven, that puts another meaning to planning. It's a meaning that we in academia understand and in the professional world understand pretty well. But you have to think in terms of the context of the church. How does the church define planning? What does it mean to do planning in the church? Because churches do have plans. They may not necessarily do planning the same way as businesses do planning. And that's just a descriptive statement. You see what I'm getting at?
Sure, yeah.
So then, if you are, okay, what you would have to do is you'd have to go to the literature. Is there literature that addresses the concept of data-driven planning in churches? You may or you may not find that. So then what you want to do now is just look for planning and churches. How do churches do their planning? How do churches define planning? What does planning mean in the context of a church? Do you see what I'm getting at?
I do, yes, thanks.
Right, so that's the kind of thinking that you have to use as you work on coming to a decision in terms of the concepts that you are going to be studying for your research. Okay. The conceptual framework also describes and defines the reason for your research. So that is why it's very important. It's foundational. It defines the reason for the research. And that's why we have linked, and we always link the conceptual framework to the questions of the research, and also chapter 2. The literature review is basically a description of the conceptual framework that underlies your research. It's the theoretical framework that comes from the existing theory. And as we know, theory is used to describe or to predict phenomenon. Conceptual framework is the understanding of how the research problem will be explored and the specific direction that the research will have to take. Then I just point out a few ideas from sensing. The conceptual framework is presented by the research questions. It supports the methodology of the study, and the review of literature describes the conceptual framework behind the study or that is surrounding the study. Any questions or comments on this? This is brief, but I have some more to go. Oh, I see our time is...
We're doing pretty well. Let me ask one question, Dr. Henry, because I know it's also confusing sometimes. Can you help the students understand the term variable and put that in the context of, say, when we're talking, let's say if we even use Anthony's study here in terms of planning, community, and transformation.
Okay.
Try to give an example of what maybe variables would be in there in terms of defining the relationships.
Okay, I do have an example for, I'm going to pull that up and show you.
Okay.
I'm going to get out of this one. A variable is the same as a concept. And we have them, we use them all the time. Okay. Okay, I'm pulling up Siobhan's work here. And the question she started out with, she says, do parental words of blessing affect how children grow? Okay. In terms of a variable, a construct, words of blessing. That's a variable or construct. You can measure it. A variable can be measured. And then she went on to list what she calls the theories that she wants to study. The first theory she says is, and I just highlighted, positive words or blessings greatly impact children and affect how they grow. And then the second one, she says, negative words or withholding kind words to children can stunt growth and creativity, as well as create behavioral issues. Siobhan, let me put you on the spot. Tell me a little bit more about these two theories. Have you seen anything in the literature on them? How did you come to identify these?
Two different literatures that I read. One was on a rite of passage. For my first week's article, it talked about children's development and affirmation when they were crossing through from childhood into adolescence and adolescence into adulthood. The process of going through that and having, it actually goes into more detail, but actually having same-sex blessing from male to male in different areas to affirm manhood or womanhood in context, seeing the difference versus the peer pressure of trying to find oneself from as it relates to when they're shifting and growing. So I may have bounced all around, but that was just one of them. And another one was on letters from dad. And it was an article, I think, by the Orlando Centennial news reporter, but he basically did a synopsis of the book and the program Letters from Dad, explaining that fathers sometimes want to say these words, or sometimes they're so busy to say these words, or have never said them because the words were not said to them. And the impact that it has had on kids reading letters years later, as well as during different passages in their lives.
Okay. Now, I appreciate your sharing with us the background to how you got here. Now, on a larger scale, what you would like to study falls under the umbrella of development, children's development. It falls in the field of psychology. And certainly you're going to see a lot of literature, a lot of research, and I want to emphasize research here, because my sense is, correct me if I'm wrong, the literature that you have referenced just now, my sense is that they're not research based. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
One of them is the rite of passage one is research based. The other one is not.
Okay, good. So one of the key things about what we're doing as we look at concepts and variables and constructs, you're going to find these defined in the field of research. So when you read the literature, you have to make sure you're reading primary research reports on these studies. There's a lot you're going to find in terms of people's opinions, ideas, etc., about what you want to do, what you're interested in. Those have their place, but not in your research study. You want to drill down, get to the research, because what the research does is that it tests these constructs. And what you're doing is the same thing as testing these constructs. So as a basis for what you're doing, you want to look at what other people have done in terms of testing these constructs, ideas, etc., that you have. So I hope that is clear to everybody.
Let me make a couple of comments here too, just again, and then open it up. And just some of the research articles that I saw that you'd given us, were just that. They weren't actually based on any kind of empirical study. Like I say, many times there were people, giving their opinions or maybe citing somebody else who has done a study. But I think, as Dr. Henry said, trying to get at research articles that represent some kind of a study where some kind of empirical data has been collected. I want to make another comment. I don't know if is Siobhan's writing still available to you there, Dr. Henry?
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
That? I wanted to make one other comment on variables that I thought would be helpful, because I think that term, if you've not been involved in research, that term can sometimes be an issue. If we look at down here, I'm looking at about the third or fourth paragraph. The second theory is negative words or withholding kind words to children can stunt growth and creativity. So sometimes in the literature reading, you'll hear about independent variables and dependent variables, okay? And so make sure that we're just clear on those. If I was looking at this statement, negative words or withholding kind words, okay, that, at least as I'm analyzing this sentence, that's an independent variable, okay? A parent is doing that. Okay, the dependent variable is what effect does that have on the children? Okay, the independent variable of giving negative words or withholding kind words is producing an effect in children, which is the dependent variable. It's dependent on what the parents are doing. The dependent variable here is stunted growth, lacking creativity, other kinds of behavior issues. Those are all issues that are dependent on whether that parent is giving positive or negative kinds of praise or lack of praise to the child. Is that fairly clear to everyone in terms of what an independent variable is and a dependent variable? Okay.
Anybody else has a question, comment on variables? No, I'm going to sorry, I said that, and then I want to introduce you to the PowerPoint that we're not going to be able to complete the whole thing, but I'm going to put the PowerPoint into the week's lesson. So you'll be able to go in and view it for yourself. But it's very, very helpful in helping us to understand theoretical constructs. So let me pull it up for you. Okay. Okay. This is taken from Dixon Adam. What is the theoretical framework? It is a blueprint or guide for research, as we've said, and it serves as the foundation upon which your research is constructed. One writer compares the role of the theoretical framework to that of a map or a travel plan. So, as we've said to you, the theoretical framework is foundational. Now, what happens here, because it's foundational, if your theoretical framework is weak, then your whole research is going to be weak. That's why you're going to see that you're going to be spending a lot of time on this part of the process. And as we have been saying to you, make sure that the theory that you are proposing is founded in the research literature. You want to make sure that you do that. All aspects of your research should be connected to the theoretical framework. It is that which holds your work together. The relevant theory are theories that underpin the knowledge base of the phenomenon that you're going to study. It consists of theoretical principles, constructs, concepts, and tenets of a theory. Make a unique application of the selected theory so as to apply the theoretical construct to your dissertation. Your use of the theoretical construct will be different from somebody else's use of it. But in the world of research and knowledge, once you're able to identify the theory, anybody reading it will understand what you're talking about. Last week in the discussion, I gave an example and I said that many times within the church, we are concerned about attendance, participation, etc. That's a question that I have about people in churches. Now, what are some theories that explain that? There are many theories. For example, engagement. Engagement speaks about how people identify with a particular group. Now, the theory of engagement has been studied in many, many contexts. The church is just one context in which we can study and apply the theory of engagement. There's another theory that will help us to understand the participation or the lack thereof in the church setting. It's the theory of sense of community. Now, sense of community is not unique to the church, but as a construct, it can help us to understand what is happening within our different churches. So when you go to theory, then you open up your study to people from outside of your context to understand what you're talking about. It's the common language of research as such. The importance of the theoretical framework in research, it provides the structure to define how a researcher defines his or her study philosophically and it normally serves as the focus of the research study and is linked to the research problem on the study. So you will notice that we are having you do the two exercises together, identifying the theoretical constructs and then identifying the questions of your study, because we want to make sure that that you understand that connection, because it's foundational to what you're doing. It guides the researcher's choice of the research design and the data analysis plan, and it provides a common worldview or lens from which to support your thinking on the problem. The theoretical framework guides and must resonate with every aspect of the research: the statement of the problem, the literature review, the methodology, the presentation and discussion of findings. So it's a line that goes through the entire work that you're going to do. Let me stop here to give you a chance to make a comment or ask a question. And I want to be sure that you are clear about what we're looking at now. Questions, comments?
I'll make one other comment and then a question too. And I think as we're kind of thinking through this issue, as we're thinking of as a theoretical framework, I'm trying to think how to help the students a little bit in terms of how discussion of that framework fits into, say, the problem statement section, and then how it might fit into the purpose statement section where we would talk about the research question specifically. Just as you're thinking about the problem statement section and the purpose statement / research question statement, how would that theoretical framework be discussed in the context of each of those sections?
Do we want the students to respond in terms of their understanding?
Sorry. Yeah, you could respond, Dr. Henry, or students could also.
Yes, I'd like to hear from the students too.
Okay.
So I want to hear how they understand it before I make my comment.
Okay.
Dr. Henry,
Yes.
I have a question. I'm Felicia. Yeah. So what I understand from you is it is important for us to have enough research to come up with a very strong theory, correct? Do I understand that correctly? Like, you know, in order for us to be able to come up with a strong theory for us to write, it is very important that we also have sufficient research data or information or reference in order for us to be able to come up with a strong theory.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, I'm noting the language. I notice you say strong theory. A theory is a theory. Weak or strong. But I hear you. Now, what we're saying to you is that it's about backing up your idea or your thinking. So, because when you're doing research, you're not doing something new. You're adding to the body of knowledge out there. So what you have to be able to do for your sake, you have to understand the theory that is of interest to your research. And in order to understand that theory, then you have to read widely. Yes. And you have to read other people's research in terms of that theory, that construct. So, so it's like you're building a case, and if you're building a case, you have to show the evidence, and you have to show evidence for your understanding about the case, about the theory, and then you're going to show why, given your understanding, you are going to apply this to the context in which you are going to do your study. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have perhaps I'm just going to take everybody's time for my question that I have or my concern, right?
Go ahead.
If you don't mind, yeah.
That'll
So
help.
what
That'll help all of us.
Okay. Yeah, because what I'm trying to, well, I have actually started to do my research, and it is specifically dealing with challenges that practitioners of business admissions are facing. So in the recent 8 months that I have obviously, coming home and, starting business, I have spoken to business admission practitioners who have tried to enter Southeast Asia, and they are having challenges. So in the first week's lesson, I was trying to look for business admission, challenges by business admission practitioners, for example. I don't see a lot of that material out there. I was looking for business admission in Southeast Asia. I don't even see a lot of materials out there in these keywords. So I am not too sure how else can I go about doing my research.
Okay, here's the thing, and that's why your concept and your theory becomes important. Your business as mission is a value statement about business. So what you need to be looking at in the literature is how businesses identify and present their values. Because business as mission, the underlying concept there is about values that businesses are built on, or the values that the business wants to portray. Does that mean anything to you?
Yes.
So I suggest to you that you go and look in the literature on values and business. And I also suggest that you probably aren't going to find a lot of research literature that speaks specifically to business as mission, but that's okay. Mission is about values. So look at values and see, and then you're going to see it coming out.
One other concept I was just thinking that could be relevant, the whole idea of corporate social responsibility.
Yes.
That you're going to be able to find literature both at the secular level and how that gets applied to, say, more Christian organizations. So CSR is a common term that would be used in values of a business.
Okay, good. Anybody else? We want you to interact because you have to be able to apply this to what you're doing.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's Dory. So just as you were talking, you talked about engagement theory and sense of community. So I think what feels muddy for me as I read literature, there's just, I didn't even know those two things you mentioned were even theories. So would you suggest, as we sort of narrow down the theoretical framework, is that we're just going to find things in the literature that will spark us? We don't have a list of 1,000 theories we can pick from. So it feels like I don't actually know what I'm looking for. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, because that is usually where we all start. Not having a little idea, but not really sure, what direction. So our role is to help you to get in that direction. But at the same time, I don't want to rob you of the what you gain from the search for yourself.
Right. Okay. For example, I'm looking at as having a community counseling center that's hooked to a church. We're not caring about just fixing individuals, but we want to care about holistic healing that affects a whole community. So is there some...
Just a minute, may I stop you right there?
Yes.
Holistic healing, that's a concept.
Okay. Not a theory.
It's a concept, and there are theories that explain holistic healing.
Okay.
Okay? So you, in the research literature, you could look to see what writers are saying about holistic healing.
Okay.
And that brings us to another piece that is important. That is why we say that you have to define the key terms of your study.
Okay.
Let me make one other comment. And we've been wrestling with this issue because I'm working through the final project handbook right now. In past handbooks, we've said we don't want a study to be just theoretical, but we want it to be, practical. And at BGU, we've always emphasized, practical work. And I think sometimes some of us started to see the word theoretical as a negative, okay, because we saw it as not practical. That led me to look up the term theory. And Dr. Henry and I were talking about this, I think yesterday or the day before. A theory is, quote, a coherent group of tested general propositions commonly regarded as correct that can then be used as principles or principles of explanation and prediction for a phenomena. So a theory is it's a set of principles that have been tested in some way, and you can use those principles to make predictions about how things are going to happen. Holistic medicine, holistic healing consists of a whole series, a whole set of principles, concepts that have been discussed and tested, within various, even, medical kinds of settings. The theory, sometimes we use the word theory, and it sounds like, well, that's just something that really has never been proven. Okay, and when you look at the definition, though, it's actually a group of general propositions and principles that have been tested and have some validity now based on people who have studied a particular issue. So you got to really look at the word theory. And I was getting even tripped up about this, even as I've looked at the way we've used that term at BGU. Theory is not a bad thing. It's simply a set of principles that have been discussed, tested, and then you can use those to apply to situations. Okay, in your case, you're talking about, holistic healing. It's a set of concepts or principles that people have discussed and applied in various settings. You're going to then take that set of principles, that theory, and apply it to your particular community.
Thank you, Bill. Can I just bring your attention to this frame on here? Notice what it says about the theoretical framework in this third block. It says, it convinces readers that the study is not based on the personal instincts of the researcher, but rather on established theory gathered via credible studies. Mm-hmm. This I want to highlight. Okay, and then I want to move to the next frame because this will give us some examples of theoretical framework. Transformational theory, which BGU stands for, culture theory, cognitive theory, gender theory, behavioral theory, developmental theory. Siobhan, your study falls in this area. Human environment relationship theory, culture ecology theory, culture determinism theory. Those are just a few. They're just so many theories, but these are just a few. Okay. The next slide, and we'll probably end here, but as I said, this is going to be in the course, so you could go through it to yourself. How to construct a theoretical framework. There is no one perfect or right theory for a dissertation. The theory must reflect the understanding of the researcher regarding the study and must direct the study. So the two key things is that you must understand the theory because the theory will reflect your understanding and that theory will direct your study. It will direct your method, etc. The selection of a theoretical framework requires, and this is the key now, a thorough understanding of the problem, the purpose, the significance, and the research questions of a study. And this word thorough is key. And this is what explains the process of writing and rewriting and rethinking, because you have to know it like the back of your hand, so that when anybody challenges you and as to why you did your research, why did you choose that context, why did you choose that sample, you are able to answer. Thorough understanding. Okay, question, comment. This will be the last that we will look at together because of our time, but like I said, it will be in the course, so you can go through the PowerPoint for yourself, and you could even download it.
I'm going to dive in here and just say, so if I'm hearing this right, in my area of study, community transformation would be a concept.
Yes.
Asset-based community development would be a theory.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so healthcare planning might be a concept, but statistical theory underlying that would be important to understand and articulate.
Okay.
And I ask that because my interest is in some sense borrowing from the concepts of healthcare planning, but I would need to understand and articulate what theory underlies healthcare planning, or what theories underlie healthcare planning. Is that a fair statement?
You are right, and you are right.
Okay.
But what I would like to suggest to you, and I hear the passion behind your focus on using healthcare planning as a model to apply to the church. However, I would caution you on that. I would suggest that rather than using that model, that you go to the church, go to the literature about church planting and church planning, and see what are the underlying theories that have guided that process, and then use that for your study. And I'm saying that based on asset-based community theory, because the asset-based theory says to us that the organization, the community, the context, that they have resources. They have resources that you would want to encourage them to use. So for example, going back to the church, the way that churches do planning may differ from the way that businesses do planning, but churches do planning. So then why not let us look at how churches do that and help them to do it better? Do you see what I'm saying? That I know will challenge you to make a major shift in your thinking, but I'm just throwing that out to you.
It could be, again, this is Bill, it could be, Anthony, as you were looking at various models. I like the word model more than theory, actually, myself, because sometimes, I mean, even in looking at the definition of theory, one definition is a coherent group of tested general propositions. The second definition is a proposed exclamation whose status is still conjectural. That's the second definition. And then number three, in the mathematics, a body of principles, theorems, etc. So, I mean, for me, I can also use the word model. You could see models, say asset-based community development is a model that has been used and tested in various communities. You could say, look at that model that has been used in community development, and you could compare it to, say, a model that you have seen useful within the healthcare planning community. And you're going to see, granted, you're taking a model of planning and you're just applying it to a particular discipline, whether it's, community development, healthcare planning. You're still looking at models that people have developed and tested and applied to determine how they work. So you may compare some models that have been used specifically in community development, compare those to what you've seen in healthcare planning.
Yeah, I had already Dr. Henry, thank you. I had already made a note of the compare and contrast approach, perhaps being more productive and less troublesome. And I think I understand what you're suggesting. Don't lean into what I know, lean into what I don't know,
Right.
which is church planning. How do churches plan?
Yes.
Tease out what is real from that, and then compare and contrast, and suggest how the learning needs to grow. So, yeah, no, I think that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Let me make one other comment, because I mentioned the question earlier about how pieces of a theoretical concept fit into the problem statement section, and then how those fit into, say, the purpose statement section where you'll get into the research. I'll just answer that question from my perspective. In the problem statement section, I said the second part of that, the middle part of that, you're going to cite some documentation that is relative to your topic. If you were, say we're on yours, Anthony, if you found something about somebody quoting something on transformational planning, or just transformation, community transformation, you are actually stating a piece of your theoretical framework by quoting somebody in the problem statement. I'm not sure at the problem statement you'd get into the whole issue. This is the theoretical framework. I'm not sure. You might make comment on that, Dr. Henry. What I'm thinking, though, in terms of the sources that you quote in the problem statement to support your problem statement, you could be citing various authors that are relating to various concepts or theories or models that relate to your topic. What I'm thinking then, when you get into the purpose statement, we're going to talk about the research questions. And even as you were today, I think in your discussion, you were thinking about a question that you wanted to ask through your project, and what theory, based on the literature that you're looking at, could possibly be related to that question. What I'm thinking, it would be in our purpose statement section and the research questions that you would be able to explain in a little more detail the theoretical framework that is relative to the questions that you're asking. So in the problem statement, you would just have a few sources that would maybe touch on that theoretical framework, because, transformation, if we're looking at Siobhan, we're talking about child development. You maybe quote an author, talking about child development, somebody Jones says such and such. The concept of child development is part of your framework. You're not going to go and define the whole framework at that problem statement, but you will define, I think, that framework as you're talking about the purpose statement, the research questions, and how you're going to approach this whole study. I don't know. You can give your thoughts on that, Dr. Henry.
That's acceptable. I think that's pretty clear.
Okay. Does that make sense to everyone as you're kind of thinking about where this theoretical framework actually fits into the discussion? I mean, your whole project is based on that theoretical framework, but where you may, talk about it, you could define it a little more specifically within the purpose statement, which you'll work on in another week or two. And then in the literature review is actually going to be organized thematically by topics that relate to the various parts of your conceptual framework, your theoretical framework. And we'll talk about that more when we get into the literature review chapter.
Yes, I would add that when we get to the literature review chapter, we will go back to this PowerPoint and this discussion on the theoretical framework.
Good.
I have a separate question. Can I ask another question?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. Go back all the way to the front when you were talking about variables. One of the things I've noticed in a lot of primary research is a reducing of variables so that you get a clear understanding of what exactly your research showed without having to wonder, was it about this, or was it about that, or was it about this? So I'm wondering if in my topic in particular, for example, if it is best to try to reduce as many as possible of those variables by narrowing the topic of your research.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You get it. Yes. You have to.
The second question is, you refer to BGU transformational leadership principles. Based on what? Where are you seeing that we would draw from that?
If you go to the literature and just enter the word transformational leadership, you'll probably come up with hundreds of thousands of articles because it's a big concept, right?
I got that, but it says BGU principles
Ah.
of transformational leadership. So
Okay.
that's,
No, yeah, we use, what we call the eight perspectives of transformational leadership, shalom,
that's what you're referring to.
reflective. Those are concepts that we use here at BGU specifically to talk about transformational leadership. You're not limited to that, but
Right.
that discussion, since you're doing a dissertation within a BGU context, we would want to see those values reflected somewhere in the dissertation discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Final question is, dissertation, when we're finished with this class, is there room for change in any of this before we actually start the research?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, basically what you're doing here in the research methodology course, you're practicing, you're learning the concepts, and you're going to practice those concepts in writing within a particular topic. That topic may change. I mean, I've had students totally change their topic as they come through a research methodology, and that's fine. When you present your proposal to the academic cabinet and it's approved there, if you then changed radically your proposal, then it would have to go back to the academic cabinet for reapproval. That's if it was a major change. If you're just making some minor changes in methodology, et cetera, those don't go back to academic cabinet. It's just if you made a major change, you say in the topic or the focus of your project, then it would have to be reapproved by the academic cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we're out of time. I appreciate the discussion. Let's see, next week, I think we will go ahead and get together on, let me ask you, is there any preference on Mondays or Wednesdays in terms of class when we do these? I know I have one other Monday, I have to do another faculty meeting. That's the only time people are available. I think it's on February 4th or something. So we'd have to change to a Wednesday for that week. I mean, we could change to a Wednesday if we find that helpful. We'd had it on Mondays because we thought that maybe kind of starts the week, whatever concepts we're working with. The other side of the coin is you get into doing some reading, and then by Wednesday you've maybe done some reading, you've started working on some of the issues, and then we talk about it. I don't know, maybe just take a minute or two and talk about those options.
I would vote for Wednesday. I like having some framework to enter the Zoom class with. And then just from my personal work perspective, jumping into the week, Monday morning is kind of hallowed ground. It's tough to share that. So that's me.
Okay. Other comments?
I'd vote for Monday. I like starting off the week with an idea of where we're going so that I can delve in from there.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Monday or Wednesday?
I was just going to say I liked getting last week's assignment back with some feedback, which gave me a little bit more time to dive in. So I would vote for Wednesday as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me give that some thought. My preference right now, I'm thinking, would probably be Wednesday, just because it does give you a little chance to get into the issues to see what maybe you're going to struggle with before you, and then you maybe could frame your questions even a little more as we get into Zoom. A Zoom room, let's just say the purpose of the Zoom room, it's for us as instructors to give some presentation, but we don't want to spend the whole Zoom room on our presentation because, you can just watch a video and get a presentation. We want to be able to give, brief presentations on an issue, and then we want to really have a lot of time to wrestle with the issues, just like we've tried to do in this particular session.
Yes, and I would like to add, thank you, Bill, that when you come to the Zoom room, come prepared for this interaction, because this is where, you know, it's one thing to have it written out, I know that, but something happens when we talk it through with each other. And it's very important. So I place a high value on that, talking back and forth, because you have to, in order to get to a place of understanding. So come prepared for dialogue in the Zoom room.
The only comment I want to make is it's very, very helpful to decide ahead of time when these things are going to be. Just going week to week and deciding makes it hard for me for scheduling. So.
Right, I agree.
Yes, yes. So then we probably just need to settle that we will meet on a Wednesday.
Yeah, I think let's go ahead and make an executive decision on that role. I understand a few of you thought Monday would be good just because to kind of give an idea. But I think if our purpose is to really have a good discussion on the content, you need to have gotten into the content. And so by the middle of the week, I think you'll have a little more of a grasp on what's happening in terms of the reading, and you maybe have even started doing some discussing. So I think let's go ahead and just stay with Wednesdays. It'll be 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. And let's just stay with that schedule for the rest of the term here. And I'll put that announcement out to the whole class by way of email. All right, I appreciate you all with us today. Keep working on the discussions. And
Sorry, Dr. Bill.
Go ahead.
I have got one last question.
Okay, go ahead, Felicia.
Is there any way for us to just maybe fix an appointment with you or Dr. Claire in the event that we need more clarification with our work?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just email either one of us, and we can just set up a phone conference or a Zoom conference either way.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, with that, I think we will close down this Zoom session. And again, next Wednesday, we will get together 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so we'll be talking to you more in the classroom. And so pray you have a great day, a great evening, wherever you happen to be. Thanks for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good day, everybody.